In Flanders fields, the poppies grow, between the crosses, row on row. Hello everyone and welcome to this special Speaker Network presentation, ANZAC Date 2021. This morning, dawn services lit up the night sky as we remembered the fallen 106 years on from the landings at Gallipoli. Stay with us now as we take you to a full replay of this morning's dawn service from the Gold Coast.
An ode to a digger. A soldier died last night. There was no fear, there was no flight, when death embraced with all its might. A cold dark cloak, a breathless choke, without a sound, swept all around. That barren land, hot air and sand, stole a life during wasteful strife. Death like a wave engulfed the brave as they made a stand in a foreign land. So far from home, their spirit will roam. In battle they fought, our freedom they bought. A desperate plight, way out of sight, a war of madness, of evil and sadness. We honour them still, we always will, today and tomorrow, with pride and sorrow. So stand tall today, and together we pray that evil will perish and their memories we cherish. We will remember them.
In 1915, Australian and New Zealand soldiers known as the ANZACs formed part of the expedition that had set out to capture the Gallipoli Peninsula in order to open up the Dardanelles to the Allied navies. The ultimate objective was to capture Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire and an ally of Germany. On this day, between 0200 and 0300 hours, 106 years ago, the first wave of ANZACs were ready in their landing boats. The boats were towed towards the shore in which we now know as ANZAC Cove. Things started to go wrong in the pitch dark, with the landing boats pushed further northeast than intended. At approximately 0415 hours, the first 36 lifeboats carrying around 1,000 men are cast off from the towboats 90 metres offshore and begin rowing towards the beach. The Ottoman defenders light beacons ashore as they spot the first wave of landing boats. Rifle and machine gun fire break out from trenches above the shore. The sound of a large shell flying overhead is not a pleasant one, particularly when dropped into the water only a few yards in the bows. The inclination to duck is quite irresistible, and they ducked every time a shell went by. The boats landed further north than planned, on either side of Ari Burnu headland. units of the fixed wave became mixed up once ashore and caused even greater confusion. As the first wave finally reached the top of the first ridge and captured prisoners, the second wave commenced landing. The artillery battery at Gaba Tepe inflicted heavy casualties on this wave. Those who make it ashore north of Aribunu head towards Russell's Top. Those who land further south at Hellfire Spit climb up to 400 Plateau and Lone Pine. By 0500, the first units of the ANZAC main force approached the shore under heavy fire. As the number of wounded soldiers on the beach increases, the landing boats begin to transport them to the hospital ship Gascon. During the next 2 hours, reinforcements arrived to help the troops fighting at the neck, and the ANZAC staff set up its headquarters on the beach. The main ANZAC objective for the first day has been achieved by advancing onto the third ridge. However, by 0930 hours, small groups of ANZACs on the third ridge are forced to retreat, but manage to hold off attacks on the second ridge until the main force arrive and strengthen existing positions. The Ottomans launch an assault on Australian positions on the 400 Plateau and the second ridge. ANZAC troops capture Baby 700, but then lose it. It will change hands 5 times during the day as fighting intensifies. By 1400 hours, forces on second ridge signal that their situation is critical. The beach is now crowded with wounded and dead troops. As the day progresses, Colonel John Munash's 4th Australian Brigade lands and fills the gap in the ANZAC line between the neck and units further south. By the evening, senior ANZAC commanders discuss evacuation. They are concerned that a determined attack in the next 24 hours will drive them back into the sea. Lieutenant General Birdwood sends an evacuation request to the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force, Lieutenant General Sir Ian Hamilton on board HMAS Queen Elizabeth. The request is refused, and at midnight, Hamilton orders ANZAC forces to dig in and hold on to what little gains they have made. He states, "You've got through the business end. All you have to do now is dig, dig, dig until you are safe." ANZAC Cove is only 600 metres long. That is 150 metres less than our beach at Currumbin. In the first 20 hours of that landing, 16,000 men had landed and more than 2,000 had been killed or wounded. Consider the words of Major Vivian Benjafield of the Australian Army Medical Corps, who at the time was a medical officer on HMT Armidale, which had been converted into a temporary hospital ship for Gallipoli. He said, "We were supposed to have 5 hours to prepare the ship for the reception of wounded, but as a matter of fact, they were landed on us before the first troops had even left the ship. The first boat to come alongside had about a dozen men on board with 1 dead. There was nothing for it but to take them and do the best we could for them. Fortunately, the hospital had been cleared, giving us accommodation for the seriously wounded. The remainder were just stowed wherever we could find room." According to Major Benjafield, the noise of the firing was terrific. Literally hundreds of shots were fired from the guns. The wounds received were terrible. Major Benjafield describes how lucky some were in escaping the serious wounding. At least 3 whose identity discs saved them from lung wounds. One man found a bullet in a copy of the Bible he carried in his left breast pocket. Another had 2 jackknives in his trousers pockets. These were perforated by a bullet, which then just buried itself in his side, right over the top of the femoral artery.
We were there in the fields and the jars. Good morning, veterans, your families and our friends. This morning, as the chaplain for the club, I want to focus on just 3 words for a very short time. They are lest we forget. From that point of view, I want to pose 2 questions. Who are they addressed to? And who is the only one who will never, ever, ever forget? We know that lest we forget is the response to the ode of remembrance, which of course concludes with we will remember them. So my first question, who is lest we forget is addressed to. I suggest it's to us as the survivors and heirs of the hard-won victories of World War I, and by inference the subsequent battles. And it's important because the lest implies that there are consequences attached to forgetting. That is, if we forget the past history, then we're bound to repeat it. Most importantly, we're bound to repeat its failures. Our lest we forget response is from an 1897 Rudyard Kipling poem in 5 stanzas entitled Recessional. The first 4 of those stanzas finishes with those words, lest we forget, each repeated. And the repeat is for the emphasis on the notion of forgetting. Kipling addresses his poem to the Lord God of hosts, and that is the God of the Bible. In these days, that's overlooked, which in a way is a motif for our society's increasing trend to forget about the Lord God of hosts. The God that Kipling acclaimed as the only source of salvation when all else and everyone else fails us. That's the answer to my second question. Who is the only one who will never, ever, ever forget? That's because in the Bible, one of God's great promises through his prophets to his people 700 years before Jesus states, I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. God's assuring his people that death is not always permanent. In fact, he scoffs at the inadequate and relative power of the plagues compared to his absolute power, saying, where, O death, are your plagues? Around 700 years later, Paul of Tarsus repeated the message to the 1st century people of Corinth, writing that there is no end for Christians in an early death when that occurs. The consequences of their early death has been done away with by the death, resurrection and ascension of the one true, perfect God-man, the absolutely innocent Jesus. And so he writes, mortality will become immortality, and death has been swallowed up in that victory. And while this applies to Christians in the 1st century of Corinth, it applies also to all people who put their trust in Jesus. Today, many continue to suffer the injury of war long after the physical scars are healed. To some, the pain seems so inconsolable, so insurmountable, so unbearable that they inflict pain on others through uncontrolled anger, substance abuse, or worse, taking their own lives. I can't begin to understand the depth of that pain. Perhaps the upcoming Royal Commission will help. I pray it leads to great healing across our veteran community. And as I now conclude, I put it to you that you should not forget the fallen, the broken and the surviving veterans. Taking a longer term view, we should not forget the God of our fathers, known of old, because the consequences of forgetting or neglecting to follow Jesus are not implied. The Lord God of hosts states through the Bible that the consequence of forgetting is eternal separation from him. I can confidently tell you that the only one to rise from the dead and stay risen into eternity is Jesus. He broke the power of the grave, the physical death, offering his followers through eternity a life without pain, without tears, without suffering. That's what God has long promised his people. And that's the good news, that we are here and we need to remember. lest we forget, lest we forget.
When I am down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burdened be, then I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. Raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up to more than I can be.
Cadet Under Officer, mount the catafalque guard.
Catapult party 8 and 10. Catapult party slow. 9. Catapult party. Halt. Catapult party. Outwards. Catapult party. Rest on.
Roll of Honour. The Roll of Honour will take place in 2 segments, with our traditional call and later a fitting farewell for the scattering of ashes at sea of our ex-service personnel. The scattering of the ashes at sea will be dutifully carried out by the surfboat crews from the surf clubs of the southern Gold Coast. It is appropriate to acknowledge our veterans who have passed since ANZAC Day, for theirs was a noble life. May they rest in peace. 17-11136, Horace Hodgson, Army. 215568, Philip Gould, Army. 93628, Roman Bobco, Navy. 23593676, Raymond Wallace, UK Army. QX 47035, Birch Christensen, Army. 2784787, Michael Lowe, Army. CJX 301639, Charles Price, Royal Navy. R54395, Robert Phillips, Navy. 102657, Hildegard Lukeman, Air Force. 2/7485595, Ronald Chapman, Army. 342638, Brian Windsor, Army. A19266, Dennis Drake, Air Force. 2158179, Alan Worthing, Army. QX 23651, Clive Gilchrist, Army. 2754793, John Sheargold, Army. 01919, Keith Railton, Navy. 21021, Tom Vaughan, Air Force. VX 110634, Brian Talbot, Army. 29326, Jack Campbell, Army. 14017-180, John Holt, British Army. VF 515952, Mary Pearson, AWAS. 1505221, Roy Carver, UK Army. 1731837, Ian Pizzi, Army. R93475, Trevor Bridger, Navy. 2/705765, Raymond Beggs, Army. 95826, Audrey Wicks, Air Force. R63607, Colin Harper, Navy. PA 4319, Ronald Williamson, Navy. 6710471, Mark Witherspoon, Army. 123539, Merv Rees, Air Force. NX 15739, Brett Hales, Army. A321 622, Trevor Thomas, Air Force. 2/760 765, William Bucknell, Army. A21 7334, John Shells, Air Force. 134805, Albert Dury, Air Force. 31476, Charles Miller, Army. A224040, Tommy Rodonigus, Air Force. We knew they had to leave us, but they never went alone, for part of us went with them. Their service, their sacrifice, our freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the last post. Will be followed by the ode and a minute's silence.
And Catapult Party, General Salute presents arms.
Go, bro.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Australia and New Zealand mourn for their dead across the sea. Flesh of their flesh they were, spirit of their spirit, fallen in the cause of the free. They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against all odds encountered. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor their years condemn. The going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them. Weep not for me, nor for my parting grieve, as I linger on the lips of men and live, and I've got a bad throat, and I cannot get rid of it, and I apologise.
Please be seated. In 1918, World War I ended and Australia's social landscape was forever changed. The cheerful enthusiasm and strong patriotism for king and country had been sorely tested, and for many would never be the same. The families of repatriated soldiers rejoiced at their homecoming, yet in time some would despair at the changed man who had returned to them. The qualities of egalitarianism, initiative and resourcefulness underpinned much of the immediate post-war portrayals of the digger. However, the personal post-war struggles of returned soldiers are at odds with the warrior image. Ill health, permanent incapacity, alcoholism, unemployment and severe depression, sometimes culminating in suicide, were conditions that characterised some of the lives of returned men. Many men and their families would endure the mental and physical debilities that invaded their lives silently and stoically. At the end of World War II, the general demobilisation of the military began in October 1945 and was completed in February 1947. Unprecedented numbers of Australians were held as prisoners during the war, both in Europe and in Southeast Asia. The long-term effects of their internment impacted them long after the war had ended, frequently shortening their lives. World War II was no different from other wars, and their intense psychological pressure the combat placed on the soldiers, and the traumatic experiences they endured, often resulting in subsequent post-traumatic stress disorder. In the Pacific War, troops were also exposed to tropical diseases, as well as the potentially harmful chemicals they used to control them. This added to the enormous toll in those serving in this arena. From 1950 to 1953, Australians served during the Korean War, with the inevitable loss of life and, for some unfortunates, capture and imprisonment. From 1950 to 1960, Australia had military involvement in the Malayan emergency. Losses were not as numerous as previous conflict, however, there were those that were unfortunate and never returned home. From 1963 to 1966, Australians had military involvement in the Indonesian confrontation. Again, our servicemen were not unscathed to the effects of armed conflict. Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War began with a small commitment of 30 military advisors in 1962. When the last Australian troops were withdrawn from Vietnam in December 1972, Australians had been fighting for more than 10 years. By that time, more than 50,000 Australians had served in Vietnam, with significant battle casualties and wounded. Since 1997, Australia has had military involvement that has led to the loss of life and permanent incapacitation of servicemen in Bougainville, Somalia, East Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan. I haven't even mentioned some of the conditions that develop later as a result of the operational service, nor the impact on the broader community. It is estimated that 45% of veterans suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Once a veteran returns home and leaves the service, many veterans have to cope with the injuries attained as a result of that service for the rest of their lives. These issues not only affect the veteran, but also their spouses, children, extended families and friends. The issue of a nation's responsibility for its veteran is not only a question of the remote past, it is one that must be asked and answered whenever and wherever the government sends our servicemen and women on operational service. No one can underestimate the price that's been paid by individuals and their families, and the price that will continue to be paid for many years to come. Ladies and gentlemen, introduce Teresa Pierce.
We meet here today not to glorify war or praise victors, but to pay our respects to all veterans who have served our country and to reflect on their selfless sacrifice and sense of mateship. To all Australians, ANZAC Day is a tradition, paid for in blood and celebrated in our freedom. It is a day in which not only do we salute the ANZACs, but paying tribute to them, we also take the opportunity to invigorate our national spirit, pride and sense of mateship. On this day in 1915, a group of volunteer Australian and New Zealand soldiers found themselves wading ashore before dawn at a small beach on the Gallipoli Peninsula. Many of these men were only teenagers, some as young as 16. All were anxious to prove their courage to their mates. Over the 8 months that's following the landing, those young ANZACs underwent a trial by ordeal. In total, 36,000 Australian and New Zealand soldiers were killed or wounded in action. But in those terrible battles, young Australians earned a reputation for courage, self-resilience and mateship. The experience drew Australians together as a nation and established our national character. The standards that they set and the ANZAC spirit have been handed down ever since to our Australian soldiers, sailors and the airmen and women who followed them. This same spirit is represented among the diverse group of veterans gathered here today, all bound by our common sense of mateship. The fact that ANZAC Day is a day for the people and our mates is evident in the way we mark it. It is not a day of military parades and power. It is a day of gathering of veterans and reunions and services, of community involvement, of reflection and honouring our forebears. If we do celebrate anything on ANZAC Day, it is the legacy of those who fought at Gallipoli and those who followed them, strengthened and enriched. In the face of adversity, the ANZACs demonstrated beyond any doubt the necessary military virtues of duty, courage, teamwork, resolution and self-sacrifice. ANZAC Day is an excellent Australian and New Zealand tradition. It is celebrated across the two nations and wherever Australians are gathered overseas. Today is our day, a day to remember with affection the courage of people and the value of friendship, to honour the dead and to acknowledge those still suffering from the effects of war. We do not celebrate victory or glorify war. We celebrate the human spirit, the spirit of ANZAC. ANZAC Day pays no heed to colour or creed. It doesn't recognise rank or gender or uniform. ANZAC Day does not prioritise recognition of the living. It's about remembering them, lest we forget.
Was burning to his eyes. From that day he kissed his mother goodbye. He knew it was no game, and when he landed there, he never felt so much fear in the air. He didn't sleep that first night, and nothing seemed to change. 9 years on, it gets dark and it's the same. Whoa. Fear burned in his eyes, the scars left in his mind. They start to ease the more he drinks his homemade wine. He's standing at the bar, his back against the wall. This bloke told me that he was back from the Afghan. Just another Aussie boy who's been to the war.
Today we wake up a little earlier than might be comfortable. We move out into the darkness, into the cold, and we make our way to memorials across the country. We stand together and we hear words of tradition and the last post being played. Each year we endure the small degree of discomfort to bring home the memory of those men who otherwise boarded boats and headed off to enemy shores. I have seen war, I have taken lives, I have lost mates and those that I was supposed to bring home. But I cannot imagine what those men faced on those shores of Gallipoli and their lives beyond. ANZAC Day carries many different meanings for many different people. And in a world where we continue to focus on the surface, to look for differences in race, colour, gender, preference, pronoun or otherwise, ANZAC Day must be that day where we look back into the past and remember, through the example of those brave few, what truly defines a person, their character and their actions each and every day. Because on that day, brave Australians from all walks of life renewed their daily contract to the service of our country as they strode forward into certain peril. And while thousands were lost on that first day, thousands more continued forward, past death and destruction that we could only imagine, and they faced willingly, so as we may never have to. My name is Heston Russell, and I stand here as a veteran and direct descendant of ancestors that have fought in every war that this country has been committed to. My great-great-grandfather Edward fought for our country in France in World War I, and his son Percy in World War II. My grandfather Graham Joe Lee fought in Korea and Vietnam, and this is the first ANZAC Day I spend without him after his passing in December of last year, and it is his medals that I wear on the right of my chest. My father Mark served our country in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I also fought in both those countries, only at different times in our nation's history. ANZAC Day for me is certainly a day where I pause to reflect on the service of those who have gone before us and those who continue to serve. Because it is in that service that unites us with a common bond of selflessness, inspired by the sense of purpose that is impossible to replace. Purpose that readily took us beyond any fear, except for that of letting down our mates or our country. And I miss that feeling of being truly inspired, not for the savagery of war or chaos, but for truly and perfectly being aligned in mind, body and spirit with those around me. I never took enough time to speak with my grandfather and tell him of when I had seen the ANZAC spirit alive and well, when I lost one of my very best over there in Afghanistan, on those lands far away, and watched on as our men fought through for a purpose so strong that it still inspires me today. Many of us have been sent to fight overseas and many more have not, but they still signed up to serve and stood ready. True courage is dedicating yourself to face uncertainty, to pledge yourself to those around you, to stand there or even alone. And while we don't give out medals for moral courage, it is more of that courage that we may well need more of today. Take a moment today to draw on the spirit of our ANZACs and be inspired to find courage in every form. To the veterans here and watching at home, thank you for your service. Service never leaves us, no matter how much time has passed. So it is our responsibility now to draw on our shared experience, to be inspired by our ANZACs and be the custodians of their spirit. Let only our character and our actions define us now and each and every day. And let's lead by example and do what needs to be done to be worthy of their legacy, to renew our daily contract to our nation and its people, lest we forget.
We acknowledge the request of our ex-service personnel, relatives present who are desirous of the ashes of their next of kin, veterans, to be put rest at sea. In doing so, enables us to find their friends to be worthy of the trust they've imparted on us in their passing, for theirs was an honourable, noble life. Ray Milford, Army. Brian Morrissey, Army. Barry Clements, Navy. Gordon Armstrong, Gordy, Navy. Michael Summers, Navy. James McCreel, Merchant Navy. Stanley Moore, Army. Robert Phillips, Navy. Roma Phillips, Navy. Mary Pearson, AWAS. Juday Carter, Navy. Robert Bob Gillespie, Army. Alan MacDonald, Army. Roy Rasmussen, Navy. Jack Hart, Army. Colin Darling, Navy. Ronald Olson, Navy. Amos Bowman, Army. Tom Van Bakel, Army. William Davies, Navy. Ron Chapman, Army. Keith Rainford, Army, and his wife Dorothy Rainford. Their service, their sacrifice, our freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will move into the wreath laying part of the service. Wreaths will be laid at the memorial. Wreath of the Nation, laid by Peter Thorpe. Representing Bravest of the Brave, Aged Teresa Pearce, retired. Representing Gold Coast War Widows, Bronwyn Drinkwater. Representing those who have lost the battle of within, Matt Sawyer and Karen Bird. Representing Currumbin RSL, Ron Workman, OAM. Representing Currumbin RSL Women's Auxiliary, Cynthia Munro. Currumbin RSL Chaplain, Reverend Philip North. Federal Minister for Home Affairs, Member for McPherson, the Honourable Karen Andrews, MP. State Member for Currumbin, Laura Gerber, MP. Division 13, City of Gold Coast, Councillor Daphne McDonald. Division 14, City of Gold Coast, Councillor Gail O'Neill. Ron Workman OAM Veteran Support Centre, Mr Tony Hornby. We're about to be overflown by a Spitfire. Young Veteran Support Services, Rachel Handley. Veteran Surface Association, Matt Hall. Red 6, Mike Hanley. Representing Queensland Police, Acting Senior Sergeant Steve Quinn. Representing Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, Acting Assistant Commissioner Brad Commons. Representing Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary, Michael Kelly. Representing the National Trust, Jamie Cuttriss. Representing the Gold Coast Suns, Mark Evans. Tallulah Ratcliffe and Zachary Hubbard. Representing Palm Beach Currumbin High School. Representing Eleanor State High School, Tabitha Bird, Noah Mulkerins. Representing St Andrew's Lutheran College, Amber Chalmers and Elijah Freeble. Representing St Augustine's Primary School, Bella Puz and John Baxter.
The time has come to say goodnight, for every road must end. To the ones who care and are always there, our very special friends. Let's say goodnight to those we love, and maybe shed a tear. But before we close, let's think of those we love who can't be here. Let's raise our hands to absent friends, for every road must end. You'll always be there in our hearts, our special absent friend. And when it's time for us to go and our long journey ends, we'll never be alone, you see. We'll be with absent friends. Let's raise our hands to absent friends, for every road must end. Our special absent friend. Let's raise our hands to absent friends, for every road must end. You'll always be there in our hearts, our special absent friend, our special absent friend.
All gave some gave all in pursuit of world peace. Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the national anthems. The bond of Australian and New Zealand friendship and mateship as a result of war and conflict will never diminish. Brothers in arms, the spirit of ANZAC.
Mana voices we entreat. God defend our free land. God Pacific's triple star, from the shafts of strife and war, make her praises heard afar. God defend New Zealand. Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty rich and rare. In history's page let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains and let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Catapult party 10, 10. Catapult party inwards 10. Catapult party quick. Ah.
Splendid job. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Today we honour the qualities that are the hallmark of the original ANZACs: loyalty, selflessness and courage. We pay tribute to all current and former members of the Australian Defence Force, those lost in training, on operations, the wounded, injured and ill. We have the need of the qualities of the ANZACs, and we should continue to draw on them, for they can only make our community better and our nation more confident. Let us all remember the ANZACs. On behalf of all veterans present this morning and those veterans who have since fallen, we thank you for being with us and remembering. Good morning and thank you.